Everything looks the same. But it's the little details that are important. Let's see if you got those right.
Now that you're back to your old self, Sol, if you don't mind, I would recommend Dan Versus for a review.
Well, I mean, that's fine. Let's check somewhere else.
Maybe you can review Dan Versus since you like jerk characters.
What the fuck's up with that?
Could you review the show Dan Versus?
Dan Versus! Hey everybody, Sol here. I have only one rule here. If it's animated, I'll comment on it. And alright, I'll review Dan Versus already, for fuck's sakes. But boy oh boy, has it been an interesting few months, am I right? Now that I'm back in an approximation of my old room, it's time to get back to what's most important, reviewing cartoons. And you know, all these requests for Dan Versus, it's got me thinking about anger. And you know, given the events from the past few months, they were making me pretty angry. You know, with Alpha betraying me and Theta killing me and being sent to a void where I was supposed to watch for an eternity where the dead go to die with an evil clone that I killed nearly a year ago. It made me pretty pissed off. It made me so angry, in fact, that now I think it's the time to unrepress those feelings. Ladies and gents, we are going to dip into the angry pools of Dan Versus. I can think of no better time to do it than right now. Dan Versus is a Flash animated series created by Dan Mandel and Chris Pearson, produced by Film Roman and The Hatchery, and distributed by Starz Media. The series aired on The Hub in 2011 with a total of 3 seasons and 53 episodes before being cancelled in 2013. Cancel, eh? Man, it makes me mad when things get taken away before their time. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. It's time to fester in a little bit of Dan Versus. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been so angry that you thought your head would explode? So pissed off that your limbs shake uncontrollably and can feel your heart about to leap out of your throat and stab the nearest innocent bystander? Well, if you have, then congrats! You know the plot of Dan Versus. I'm not even really joking either. The plot involves an angry little misanthrope named Dan, who lives a filthy, wretched lifestyle stewing in an unremitting broth of pure, unbridled anger. Dan is constantly seeking revenge on those who do him wrong, and will stop at nothing until his vengeance is achieved, meaning he often drags his beleaguered best friend Chris into his schemes and escapades, as well as Chris's wife Elise, much to her chagrin. Hey, sounds like my kind of plot! I mean, when you decide to become a critical human being who constantly has to point out the flaws in everything, you immediately become 10 times more likely to sympathize with the angry ones, and I'm no exception. Though the plot's formulae may get too repetitious at times, I won't lie, it is very entertaining to watch. Watching fictional people get angry at ultimately unimportant things is pretty much what started the idea of being an internet critic, am I right? Well, that and the internet too, but I'm not ready to forgive the internet for making porn of me. That's gonna take a while to forgive. I was just kidding about the porn, by the way. There's no porn. I guarantee you, if you look, you're not gonna find anything. Hey, stop that. Stop it. Stop it. Hey! You behave yourselves, you little bastards. So first on the list is Dan, an angry, irate, you know what? I'm just gonna type angry into thesaurus.com and have it do my work for me. Okay, so he's bitter, enraged, resentful, sullen, impassioned, indignant, annoyed, offended, irritated, irritable, affronted, uptight, furious, heated, indignant, I think I already said that, fiery, fuming, antagonized, and yeah, you get the point. The interesting thing about Dan is that, while most people would assume his anger is completely uncalled for, the truth is that, more times than not, his rage is perfectly justified. It's just he seems to have a hard time knowing when to stop. But a simpler way of explaining what makes Dan an interesting character would be to just say that he's basically a less foul-mouthed version of Sterling Archer from Archer. Don't believe me? Well, they're both quick to anger and highly sensitive, but hide their true feelings of affections from those closest to them. Both had dysfunctional childhoods and parlay the traumas they experienced into later hostility. Both have boundary issues and little respect for the people they associate themselves with, have fractured, strange patchworks of knowledge but are generally well-spoken and intelligent regardless, have an extremely high opinion of themselves, have an unhinged arch-enemy who wants nothing more than to get revenge on them, and they both even have an affinity for cats and regularly speak to them like people. Shall I go on? Dan is a very polarizing individual. Either you like him for his zeal, or you hate him for his shrillness. Personally, I err more on the like him side, but I do think he can get a little bit too asshole-ish for his own good at times. But hey, I think we all need a little asshole in our lives, don't we? This message brought to you by the National Assholes Group of North America. So then we have Chris, Dan's obsequious best friend with a serious eating disorder who basically does everything Dan asks of him despite his constant objections. Chris is appealing for a lot of the same reasons I find Jerry Smith from Rick and Morty and the Scout from Team Fortress 2 appealing. They all have that sort of cute, pathetic angle working for them, which I personally find very endearing. But that's not to say it doesn't get annoying that Chris constantly objects to Dan's crazy schemes, yet never has the backbone to really fight back. One could argue it's because he's Dan's best friend, but he seems to recognize that he's in a toxic relationship, yet he doesn't have the strength to break out of it. Good thing he's not a woman, because then it would just be creepy. I mean, being codependent is hilarious when it's two dudes. Am I right, or 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 am I right?
Right.
And you know what else?
What?
Chicken butt! And lastly is Elise, Chris's wife, who seems like a normal girl on the outside, but is, in actuality, the top secret agent for a shadowy quasi-governmental organization specializing in espionage, assassinations, and arms deals, going under the name Dancing Shadow. Yeah, I'm being serious. Beyond that, Elise is shown to be very intelligent and supportive of her husband, despite her intense hatred for Dan and how he constantly barges his way into their lives. Elise is alright, nothing to sniff at, but I do feel her whole secret agent story could be a series on its own. Oh, wait a sec. It was. It was called Kim Possible. And Totally Spies. And Atomic Betty. Never mind then. Good things. Yes, it's nice to have good things to say about this series. You know, after being sentenced to eternity of watching one of the worst animated things ever made, it really puts things in perspective. So let's all bask in this series' lack of mediocrity, shall we? Now then, considering what I have to work with here, given the series' simplicity and all, I'm happy to report that one of this series' strongest pillars is its comedy. While I never blew up my urethra from an excess of laughter at any time, it does have a darkly subversive sense of humor that revels in the idea of just straight up blowing everything to bits and murdering everyone who dares to cross Dan's path, which I think is quite droll if I do say so myself. I haven't seen a cartoon series be so brazen about its disdain for people in general in quite a while without burying it under pretentious subtext or the lowest of the lowbrow idiocy. It manages to find a healthy balance between fun ridiculousness and sheer stupidity, which is definitely commendable. To unpackage that statement from its artsy-fartsy trappings, I'll just say that this series is funny, plain and simple. And really, do you need anything more than that? Not to mention that Dan, Chris, and Elise have an interesting character dynamic too. Most of the time, Elise and Dan are at each other's throats, while Chris plays the reluctant middleman, but other times Elise and Chris see Dan as more of their child than anything else, given his bratty and immature attitude. It's just nice to see that there's some variations on how the characters act and react off each other. It keeps it from being boring, is what I'm trying to say. Now I'm bored. Let's go do something else! Yeah, Kumo! God, I am never gonna get bored of that! Come on, man, come back! Oh my god, shiny! This is probably one of the stranger things you'll hear come spewing out of my mouth like a malfunctioning fire hydrant, but what this series has is a demographic problem. And what the deep-fried hell do I mean by that? Well, it's pretty obvious who this series is intended for, what with its constant allusions to murder and cannibalism and other such pleasant topics, but at the same time, this is the most offensive line spoken in the whole show.
You took our lawnmower apart to build a jetpack, remember?
And it would have worked if you didn't have such a crappy lawnmower.
Now, I'm not saying that every series has to have an unscrubbed latrine for a mouth to be worth its salt as an adult series, but it does pose an issue here, in that it feels like the series is struggling to find an identity. It wants to be a big boy show really, really badly, but something is holding it back. And that something is most likely the network it calls home, but whatever. I mean, why is it okay to literally talk about cutting off Dan's testicles and eating children, but it's not okay to add in a nice fuck or shit for emphasis sake? This is probably sounding like nitpicking to you, but to me, it makes this series feel lost, like it's searching desperately for a sense of self, and that can be very distracting at times. But on the less ambiguous side, I should definitely point out that many people, myself included, can tire of this series quickly. Dan's abrasive personality and the fact that he's nearly always right with his revenge schemes can get pretty irritating over time. Even Elise, who could obliterate Dan with a wave of her hand, always chooses not to. There's no real sense of escalation, or really any consequences of Dan's actions. Sure, it's a cartoon, whatever, but wouldn't it be nice to see the ramifications of constant anger, or at least one moment where Dan has some kind of self-realization? The whole series plays in the playground of adult themes, but it doesn't quite jump straight into its sandbox, if you know what I mean. This comes back to its identity problem. It's got the structure of a kid's cartoon, but material worthy of narrative exploration like an adult cartoon, and that just makes many aspects of it feel unfulfilling. I feel like this is a series that's really hard to put in a box. Every time I feel a compliment coming on, it gets hampered by another questionable aspect. So, without further ado, let's just move on to my least favorite and favorite episode. Yes, well, luckily there aren't any episodes that made me devolve into a sobbing mess of gelatinous misery, but there are a couple episodes that fall below the average mark. And at the top of those has to be Dan versus Ye Olde Shakespeare Dinner Theater. In this episode, Dan, Chris, and Elise go to watch a play at the local Shakespeare Dinner Theater. Dan gets pissed off that the acting is so bad and gets hot soup poured on him by accident, so he swears revenge against the theater and its thespians. To be honest, this episode isn't bad by any means. It's just a wee bit dull, without too many funny jokes, and it has a bit of a plotting structure, but nothing too severe overall. Hot doggies, let me tell you, it was a tough choice between two episodes in particular that I could definitely call my favorites. So the runner-up would have to be Dan versus the Common Cold, which loses out very slightly because of a slight continuity error. So my favorite overall has to be Dan versus the Telemarketer. In this episode, Dan keeps getting called by telemarketers, or more specifically, one telemarketer who seems to have it out for Dan. Dan and his friends go to investigate and find that the telemarketer does indeed have it out for Dan, and that he won't rest until he drives Dan completely insane. Now this episode absolutely parks its butt in my favorite seat because it prominently features the most interesting character by far, aka the telemarketer himself, and it just keeps getting weirder and weirder the more it goes on. I don't want to go into too much detail here, so let me just close off by saying it's definitely a fun experience. Dan versus is, It's an odd one, people. Not to say that it's a dreadful conglomeration of horridness. No, not in the slightest. It can make you laugh with the best of them, but it does have some serious identity issues that, in my opinion, hold it back from being something truly great. It has some interesting ideas in its head, but it can't seem to express them properly, much like the titular character himself. But for what it's worth, it's a darkly humorous experience that will certainly have you laughing to the heavens. I give Dan versus. Three and a half eyes out of 5. So, Dan versus. Is it watchable? I would say that it is. Yes, absolutely. In fact, as far as Flash animated series go, it looks quite good. We've certainly come a long way from the Newgrounds.com days of old, haven't we? Is it enjoyable? Again, yes, I'd say that it is. Although it is very easy to get frustrated with Dan's jerkiness and the lack of any significant progression. Is it memorable? Well, it's kind of like Mononoke in that regard. You remember it forever once you watch it, but finding it is the difficult part. Maybe it's because somebody wants this series repressed. Well, much like the character himself, repression is a bad thing. Repression's not a character, but still, don't repress, express. For instance, I
fucking hate babies!
Good night, everybody. Would you like to stay up to date on the latest EyeofSol news, as well as contribute directly to my channel? You can find my Twitter page, my Facebook page, and my link to my Patreon page there on the screen for you, as well as in the description. I update the Twitter and Facebook pages every day, so if you want to check out news on the show, as well as updates, just follow the links here.